Today, we are going to tackle a really powerful, kind of radical idea from the world of literary criticism. It's a concept that says we should totally ignore two things we almost always think about when we look at art: what the artist was trying to do and how the art makes us feel. I know, it sounds wild, but it completely changed the game for how people analyze art. And it all boils down to two simple rules. So let's get into it.
Okay, think about the last movie you watched, or maybe a book you just finished. How did you figure out what it all meant? Did you run straight to Google to see what the director said they were trying to do, or was it all about the vibe, how it made you feel personally? This is one of the biggest questions in criticism, and it's exactly the puzzle we're going to try and solve today.
All right, so let's hop in our time machine back to the 1940s. A critic named William Wimsatt and a philosopher, Monroe Beardsley, came along and offered a completely new answer. They were part of this school of thought called New Criticism, and they basically said, hey, what if we've been looking in all the wrong places? Maybe the author's intention and our feelings are both red herrings.
So their first big idea, their first rule, was presented as a type of logical error they called a fallacy. And this one is all about the author. It poses a pretty bold question. When we're trying to judge a piece of art, should we really care what the artist was thinking when they made it?
And this is what they came up with: the intentional fallacy. It's the idea that trying to dig up the author's private intentions, what they were hoping to accomplish, is a huge mistake when you're judging the final product. Wimsatt and Beardsley argued pretty forcefully that the author's secret plan is just not the right measuring stick to use.
Now, the logic they used here is actually super slick. They laid out this simple little dilemma. Look, if an artist manages to successfully bake their intention into the work, well, then we don't need to go looking for it anywhere else. The proof is right there, in the words, the brushstrokes, whatever. But if they fail to do that, then the artwork itself is what's flawed. The artist can't just point to a diary entry and say, but I meant for it to be amazing. That doesn't fix the art. The only thing we can actually judge is what's right there in front of us.
This famous quote from the poet Archibald MacLeish, which Wimsatt and Beardsley absolutely loved, just nails their whole point. Stop asking what the poem was supposed to mean and just start looking at what it is. It's not some treasure chest where the author's real meaning is locked away. It's a thing that exists all on its own.
Here's a really good way to get your head around it. A poem is not a text message, right? When you get a text that says, running 5 minutes late, the only point is to understand the sender's intention. The message is successful only if you get that practical information. But a piece of art, they said, is playing a totally different game. Its success doesn't depend on us perfectly mind-reading the creator.
Okay, so we've put the author's intentions off to the side. But what about the other side of that coin? What about us, the audience? Our gut reactions, the emotions that a piece of art stirs up in us? Well, you guessed it, Wimsatt and Beardsley had a rule for that too.
They called this one the affective fallacy. Now, that word affective is just a philosophical way of talking about stuff related to emotions or feelings. So, put simply, the affective fallacy is the mistake of judging a work of art based entirely on the feelings it triggers inside you.
And the key point here is really crucial. Saying a movie is good because it made you cry, or a song is bad because you found it boring, well, that's mixing up two totally different things. You're confusing the artwork itself, its actual structure, its language, its form, with its results, which are your own subjective feelings. They're connected, sure, but for real critical analysis, these guys argue you've got to keep them separate.
This slide just lays it out so perfectly. You can see how they're two sides of the exact same coin. The intentional fallacy is about looking backward, getting the poem tangled up with its origins inside the author's head. And the affective fallacy is about looking forward, getting it mixed up with the results inside the reader's heart. For Wimsatt and Beardsley, both of these are just distractions from what really matters.
And here's the big danger. They warned that if you fall into either of these traps, the poem itself as an object of specifically critical judgment tends to disappear. It just vanishes. We end up talking about the author's life story or our own emotional baggage, but we stop talking about the actual art.
So, if we manage to avoid both of these fallacies, if we push aside the author's mind and our own feelings, what in the world is left? Well, what's left is the work of art itself. And this leads us to their grand finale, the core idea of it all, the autonomous text.
This right here is the big aha moment of this whole theory. The work of art is an autonomous structure. It stands on its own 2 feet. It's totally self-contained. It exists as this object that we can analyze, completely separate from the person who made it and all the people who will ever experience it. So let's just break down what that really means. First, the text is an aesthetic object.
Its purpose is just to be itself. Second, it's independent. We don't need to know about the author's childhood or what was happening in politics at the time. Third, it doesn't have to answer to our ideas about truth or morality. And finally, and this is the big one, it can only be judged on its own terms. How do its words, its structure, and all its little parts fit together to make a unified whole?
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, this is a pretty cool philosophical exercise, but what does this have to do with me watching a movie on my couch? Well, it matters because this theory offers a totally new way to actually engage with art.
The huge takeaway here is that this whole approach forces us to become better, more careful readers and viewers. It pushes us to stop reaching for the easy answers that are outside the text. Instead, it makes us look closer, to really pay attention to that one weird word choice, or a specific camera angle, or a reoccurring melody. It's all about finding the evidence for your interpretation inside the four corners of the artwork itself.
So, that leaves us with one final question for you to think about. The next time you sit down with a piece of art, a song, a painting, anything, try it out as an experiment. What happens when you intentionally ignore everything you know about the artist and you set aside your immediate gut feelings? What new things do you notice when the only thing left to look at is the work itself?